Welcome to our 3C Software Customer Podcast Series, where we have the pleasure today of speaking with Mr. Bill Carlson. He is the Manager of Cost Accounting Systems at Analog Devices and has been a long time and wonderful customer of ours, so we're really excited to have him today. So I want to welcome you, Bill. Thanks so much for joining the call.
Good morning. Good morning.
Well, hey, I just want to start off with maybe talking a little bit about your company and what you guys do at Analog Devices for our listeners who may not be familiar with you.
Sure. Analog Devices is a semiconductor manufacturer. We're headquartered in Boston, near Boston, Massachusetts, although we have factories all around the world, including the Philippines and Ireland and so forth. We make a particular type of semiconductor that deals with what we call data acquisition. It's a niche of the market that has to do with translation between real-world signals and the digital world of computers and so forth. So we make chips that will process analog signals and do various functions on those, and then digital signals and do functions on those, and then converters that are actually chips that will convert digital to analog and analog to digital.
I've said a little bit in the intro that you've been a customer of ours for, I think, almost 10 years now.
Yeah, it's 10 years this year that we implemented the system in 2000.
Wow. That's exciting. So maybe if you can think back that far, could you share a little bit about what were some of the challenges that you were facing prior to finding Impact ECS?
Sure. Analog had started as a series of relatively independent little companies that had their own freestanding systems. They did their own manufacturing, their own marketing, and a lot of their own accounting and so forth and so on. And during the 90s, we began a centralization effort. We centralized our order entry system. We centralized a lot of our general ledger and accounting systems, and that actually was done on the platform of SAP. We were one of the earlier implementers of SAP for a lot of that functionality. Our manufacturing tended to still be decentralized because the idea was that they wanted a local machine to be able to function with the local factory and not be dependent upon the telephone lines that might shut down the communications with the computer and therefore shut down the factory. So we lived in kind of a world where we were organizing ourselves centrally, but still with some of the manufacturing things decentralized. And part of the reorganization of the product line side of things meant that we had now sort of a central marketing groups who dealing with products that were manufactured in a whole bunch of different places. And part of their frustration was that each of those local places had their own way of doing costing, not only their own systems, but their own rules and instructions and formulas and so forth and so on. So the challenge that brought us to be looking for a cost system was one that we could use centrally. And therefore we wanted to have a single system that all of the product lines could use and that the information that it got would be consistent. So we were struggling sort of with the administrative parts of costing being inconsistent, but also with the system being inconsistent. So we were looking for a vehicle to allow us to centralize everything. And since we were dealing with multiple systems, it's sort of like none of the centralized offerings that were available to us really could work because we needed something that could bridge between the central systems that we were using for financing and for general ledger and for the other financial aspects of things, and then the decentralized world where manufacturing was all being done at these little local boxes at all these little sites. So we needed a way to kind of pull all of that together because costing is a cross-functional function.
Right.
At the same time, we were dealing with the same issue in the planning world, and they were looking for a planning system that could do the same sorts of things. So we kept in touch with what the planning folks were doing and walked along with them together and shared as much as we could in terms of the system's capabilities that we each were becoming aware of. So that was the challenge that we had. That was the challenge that we had at the time, was to come up with an answer that could work in this complex environment.
So did you all try to come up with a solution on your own, or were you focused on finding a solution, an external solution?
We would have considered an internal. I mean, we had built a few things. You know,
Okay.
some of the manufacturing sites had their own homegrown things, and you know, we had experience with that. We knew the downside to that in terms of support and sustainability, and that you could never get enough resources to do anything in a timely fashion out of your own internal IT folk because they were always busy working on something else. So we would have used that as a last resort.
Mhm.
But we kind of shopped the market. Well, before we go into how we found the software,
Yeah.
um, we did one other thing because the what we decided to do was instead of just basing what we were going to do in terms of this negative side of things, the things we couldn't do, we also wanted to make sure that we didn't miss an opportunity to deliver something new that was, in a positive sense, what the customers were looking for. So we did what we called a voice of the customer
Mhm.
survey. And we talked to our people in manufacturing, our people in finance, our people in the product lines, and try to come up with from them kind of the positive aspects of the characteristics of the system that we would have to design. And that revealed an awful lot of things that you wouldn't have just got if you said we want to replace our existing systems with something that's centralized. What we found from that is that the people were looking for something that was obviously consistent, because that was the evil they were trying to overcome, was the inconsistencies. But they also wanted something simple. A lot of the other cost systems, gave them too much data, and it wasn't
Mhm.
data that was relevant to them. So we wanted to come up with something that was fairly simple. We wanted to come up with something that was flexible. And
Mhm.
the other part of the equation is that because we had a history of manufacturing things in different places on different technologies, we need the flexibility to have a single system that could handle the differences between the different sites in a way that looked consistent.
Mhm.
In addition to that, we knew that this is a dynamic industry. We knew that manufacturing capabilities and technologies change a lot over time. We know that the market is always dynamic and that people's information requirements change over time. So we also needed the flexibility to have a system that we could then tailor and modify and make appropriate for whatever was going on at the time, and change that over time as necessary. So
Mhm.
those kind of came as surprises out of this voice of the customer thing as additional requirements that we tried to incorporate when we went out looking for some software.
So lo and behold, you discovered Impact,
Well, we
and
discovered
you.
impact, but that was we looked at a lot of the other things that were out there.
Yeah.
We knew we couldn't use something that was part of our manufacturing system, for example, because that was just
Mhm.
too constrained. We looked at some of the ABC systems that were out there at the time. This was in the late
Mhm.
'90s when ABC was a big deal,
Right.
and we actually prototyped a few of those to see if they could work for us, and we found that they couldn't. And we knew that SAP, since we already had it, was going to have to be a possibility we would consider. But unless you're actually tracking your goods inside of their system, it's pretty difficult to cost the goods inside their system. So that would have been a
Mhm.
last resort for us to try to use SAP. And then we found you. So
Excellent.
and it really was just before we were almost considering SAP as our last resort that we came across Impact, and we ran all of our requirements that we had discovered through our voice of the customer analysis by them, and it didn't seem to be anything that we needed that it couldn't offer. So we decided to give it a try, and that's how we implemented SAP back. Implemented Impact back starting in 1999.
So thinking back to that implementation process, how did that work for you? Did you have a team internally that you worked with, the 3C software team? Just tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, well, we had one consultant from 3C that was pretty much dedicated to us for the time that we needed him.
Mhm.
We decided to pilot the application at one of our sites. Happened to be the one that needed the most help at the
Mhm.
time, and but it also tended to be a relatively self-contained site, so we didn't have to worry about crossing data from all these other sites that I mentioned
Mhm.
to do the pilot. So it took us about 6 months to get the pilot up. We had a team of about 4 people on our side, and the one consultant from 3C. And
Mhm.
within 6 months, we basically had the system up and running, ready to put into production at that one particular site.
Mhm.
And we actually turned it on, and they turned off their old costing system, and we ran with them. And then we began the next phase of the project, which was to roll the same idea out worldwide.
Mhm.
So we tackled all of the other sites in a phase two that took about a year later. We found we had to tweak a few things because some of those other sites did things a little differently than a pilot site.
Mhm.
But essentially, the system went in worldwide, basically the same as we had done at the pilot. And we've been running it like that ever since.
So during the pilot phase, were you redesigning your business process as well? Because I know you mentioned that everyone sort of had a different way of doing it.
Yes, well, we took the pilot site's business practices, and we looked at
Okay.
them relative to what we knew would be the practices at the other sites.
Mhm.
And to some degree, we generalized it. In
Mhm.
other words, instead of implementing specifically what they had been doing, we made it more generic so that it would work for the other places when we ended up rolling it out worldwide. We still had to tweak it some more when we rolled it out worldwide too, but most of the time we did capture it in that first pilot implementation.
Right. So now, 10 years later, and we're still using the system, how do you interact with Impact ECS on a day-to-day basis? What sorts of things are the most important features that you use or information that you get from it on a daily basis?
Well, we do two things with it, really. One is that we use it to set our standard cost.
Mhm.
And we are a standard costing house. And so our regular monthly bookkeeping function is to value inventory and value work and process activity based upon the standards that are in impact, and then run variance reports and all this other kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But that's all a function of setting the standards in the first place. So we have a small team of people who are responsible for the various cuts of the products, and about sometimes every 3 months, sometimes every 6 months, depending on business conditions, we will set a new set of standards.
Okay.
And that requires going getting all brand new information about the products, their bills of materials, their routings, their units per hour, rates, prices from vendors and subcontractors, and yields, and rolling that all up into a report that basically values all of the products. At the same time, we review the results of all of that with the product line folks who will know from the market whether anything doesn't look right. And in about 4 to 6 week time frame, we will
Mhm.
finish that exercise, and then we will implement that set of standards for the next period.
And about how many products do you have that you're
We
setting
have
standards
about,
for?
we've actually just made a change to that. And
Uh-huh.
when I talk about one of the benefits of impact, as I mentioned earlier, is this flexibility thing. We were able to implement this change, which is material right now in terms of the way that we're operating. We actually have about 28,000 finished goods.
Mhm.
Um, but what we discovered is that an awful lot of them are basically the same thing with little different branding or different packing or something like that. So we actually just recently put a change in where we only cost in the system about 8,000 products, and the other guys are what we call clones. They
Mhm.
basically get the same cost as the guy they're a copy of. So we do with 1/3 the work. Basically, we still cost out the 28,000 models, but we only really have to do the work for the data that supports about 8,000 of them. So that's the kind of numbers that we're dealing with.
Right. And that was something that you wouldn't have been able to do in a more manual world in 4 to
Oh,
6 weeks.
absolutely not. Yeah. And I'm talking about we did that, but I mean we actually put systems in place so that the users can go in and they're the ones that go manage what product go with what and so forth and so on. It's not like that's something that's forced on them. I gave them forms and I gave them screens and things where they can go in and manage
Mhm.
the control of all of that, and get them the information in front of them so that they can manage that reasonably. Because we got a very small group who's managing
Mhm.
all this data, and so they were very happy when they only had 8,000 products to look at instead of 28,000 products.
So you were the hero.
Oh yes, this was a major this was a major thing that we just did that really got some very good play across the whole company,
Mhm.
including the people in the product line who were just as happy to be only looking at 8,000 products instead of 28,000 products as well.
Right.
So part of the day-to-day work is that we're always changing. They're always making new products. They're changing the routings of existing products and so forth. So even in between these major standard changes that we do, there's maintenance that has to go on. And so the users have to go in probably on a weekly basis and look at what's new, what's changed, and continually recalculate standards on things that require it. We look at things like purchase price variances from our vendors, and if we start to have a big variance, we know that something's changed in the price, so we'll go in and recalculate the price of those products. The other aspect of what we do with the system is we use it to value work in process inventory and to value all of our earnings, both for internal and external stuff, which is the thing that gets us into the variance analysis. So there's a whole series of reports that we run that are based upon the standards that we have inside of Impact. And we publish all of those as part of our bookkeeping process as well. And again,
so where
that's
are you
always
publishing?
changing.
Oh, sorry. Where are you publishing your results to? Are you using impact reports, or are you sending it to a data warehouse, or how does that work?
What we mostly do is we tend to export the data from Impact, import and export Impact into a set of SQL tables that we have in the database. We import our work in process activity into that same SQL database and then do our math in there. So we'll have the standard cost that we extract out of Impact, bounce that up against the unit activity that we get from these various manufacturing systems around the company. Do the math, multiply them out, and then we publish those reports. One version of the report, the work in process inventory report, does go to a data warehouse where it can be merged up and analyzed by other people and merged with the finished goods information that we have, which happens to be on SAP. And another version of the same data we publish in Excel spreadsheets because the accountants love to use Excel. So we can almost publish anything in Excel, and then people can take it and subtotal it and sort it and format and everything any way that they want to. And so we tend to stay away from hard-coded reports because we like the flexibility of just giving people the data and let them code them the way they want.
Right. So over the course of the past decade, I know it's tough to maybe point to specific numbers, but what would you say are the overall benefits of being able to use Impact ECS? I know we talked about the ability to quickly do or more quickly do standard costing and some of those things, but what do you think are the bigger benefits of Impact ECS for the organization?
I think the major, well, of course, we've been able to do more with less. In the sense that we've able to, because we can give people the data in a format that they're efficient at. They're efficient with using Excel. We've even got people that are efficient using Access and things like that. So they can do a lot of the work themselves in their tools without having an IT involved that would slow things up. But in addition to that, even with the system itself, the way it has calculations and formulas and scripts and so forth that you can pretty easily change, we're able to stay up with changes that happen in the manufacturing process because the manufacturing process changes all the time. Chips get smaller and smaller and smaller, and the packaging changes, and the testing technology changes all the time. We've got a thing they call a stack chip where they'll take multiple chips, put them in the package, and stack them on top of each other like a sandwich. I mean, 10 years ago they didn't do anything like that, but now they do it, and I had to be able to come up with a way to cost that, which is a different formula necessarily than costing just a single chip in a package. So as manufacturing changes things the way they're doing things, and I never know what they're going to do. They don't tell us because the engineers are, they live up in an ivory tower someplace and they do their thing, and they don't necessarily tell us poor accountants what the world is all about. So we kind of discover it by accident sometimes because we'll get a bill from somebody and say, "What's this all about?" or something like that, and then we have to quickly translate that into, well, this has an impact on the way that we cost our products, has an impact on the way that we collect the data, it has an impact on the formulas that we're using and so forth. And the nice thing is to then be able to go into Impact and just relatively easily change all of that, and then go forward and carry out the calculations on a continuing basis. And the thing that I mentioned before about the simplification of having the ability to clone some finished goods from other finished goods to gain efficiency and leverage, again, the system gave me the tools to be able to do that and do it fairly quickly. I mean, that took about 6 months to make that change, and again, it was very, very well accepted. The other thing is, and that's an instance, by the way, of the business itself, not just the manufacturing side of things, but the reporting requirements. Analog is always reinventing itself.
Mhm.
We do more restructuring and reorganization of how products are managed and sold and marketed and engineered and so forth. And we got to be able to stay up with that.
Mhm.
As the reporting requirements change, as we get people that weren't interested in cost before are now interested in cost. We got to be able to teach them how to use the system. We got to be able to put the information on their desktop in a way that's palatable to them. And the systems will let us do all of that. And there's never been more than say a 6-month lag between the time that we recognize that there's a need to change something and the time we actually deliver it. And we do that, by the way, because we're constrained by Sarbanes-Oxley.
Mhm.
So when we make changes to the system, we have to be able to do them in a way that it's defensible and it's auditable and all of that kind of stuff. And the system gives us the tools to also be able to do all of that. So we haven't been dinged on a Sarbanes-Oxley audit yet.
Nice.
Yeah.
We love to hear that too.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate your sharing a little bit about what you do with Impact ECS and how it's helped shape and mold the costing process at Analog Devices.
Mm-hmm.
So it's thrilling to hear that we've had 10 years of success, and we look forward to 10 more years of success.
Very good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks, Bill.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.